The trip felt like an escape from the chaos of everyday life, but I never imagined it would change the way I saw him, or myself. When my boss told me I would be accompanying him on a week-long business trip, I felt both nervous and flattered. Traveling with him meant responsibility, focus, and long hours of representing the company, but deep down, there was something else I couldn't ignore. He had always carried a presence that made everyone pay attention. His voice commanded a room, his smile had a way of softening even the most stressful meetings, and I had always admired him from a safe distance. We set out early in the morning, the long drive giving me a chance to see a different side of him. Away from the office walls, he wasn't just the boss. He was relaxed, telling stories from his college days, joking about little things, and even teasing me gently about how serious I looked while typing on my laptop in the passenger seat. I laughed more in those first few hours than I had in weeks at work. It felt strange, almost dangerous, that I was enjoying this trip already for reasons that had nothing to do with business. When we arrived at the hotel, the reality of being alone with him hit me. The rooms were booked side by side, just the two of us in a quiet wing of the resort. The place was beautiful, warm lights in the lobby, soft music playing, and a calmness that made it feel like we were far removed from the world. He carried my bag despite my protests, brushing off my words with a smile that felt more personal than professional. That first evening, after meetings and long discussions about our project, he suggested we eat dinner together in the hotel restaurant. It felt natural, like two colleagues unwinding after a long day, but the way he looked at me across the table stirred something inside me I tried to ignore. His eyes lingered longer than they should have, his words softer, almost as though he was letting his guard down. He told me about the pressures of leading the company, about how lonely it could feel at the top. I nodded, listening, realizing I had never seen him this vulnerable. Later, when we walked back to our rooms, the hallway seemed too quiet. I fumbled with my keycard, heart racing for reasons I couldn't understand. He paused at his door, turning to me with a small smile. "If you need anything, you know where to find me," he said. The words were innocent, but the way he said them sent a shiver through me. I closed my door, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the way his eyes had held mine at dinner, the way his voice had softened when he spoke about his life. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something heavier, something I shouldn't be feeling. Hours passed as I tossed and turned, wondering what exactly I was stepping into on this trip. Then came a knock on my door. Soft, almost hesitant, but enough to make my heart leap into my throat. I froze, staring at it, debating whether to open it or not. Part of me wanted to pretend I was asleep, but another part of me, one I didn't want to admit existed, wanted to see him standing there, waiting. I stood, my hand trembling as it reached for the handle. When I opened the door, he was there, casual, holding 2 glasses and a small bottle of wine. "Couldn't sleep either," he said, his tone light, though his eyes seemed to say more. And that was how the first night began. Not with anything scandalous, but with 2 people sitting side by side on the small couch in my room, sipping wine and talking about everything except work. Yet beneath every laugh, every shared glance, there was an unspoken tension growing between us. I knew then that the days ahead were not going to be as simple as I had thought. The second day began as though nothing unusual had happened. We attended meetings, shook hands with clients, and maintained the professional front expected of us. But underneath it all, there was a quiet awareness that hadn't been there before. When his hand brushed mine while passing documents, I felt it more deeply than I should have. When he leaned closer to explain a point, I noticed the warmth of his presence in a way I had never let myself before. By evening, when all the work was done, he asked if I wanted to take a walk. The resort had long stone paths lined with dim lanterns, and the air was cool, with a gentle breeze. I told myself it was harmless, just 2 colleagues stretching their legs after a long day. But as we walked side by side, the conversation turned personal again. He spoke about his childhood, his struggles, even the mistakes he regretted. There was a rawness in his words that drew me in. I found myself sharing more than I usually would, telling him about my dreams, my doubts, and even things I had never mentioned to my partner back home. It felt dangerously intimate. Every laugh lingered, every pause stretched into silence charged with meaning. At one point, we stopped near a quiet bench under a tree. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought he might lean in, and my heart raced so fast it was hard to breathe. But he didn't. He just smiled softly and said, "I'm glad you're here with me." Those words settled into me like a weight I couldn't shake off. Back at the hotel, I tried to distract myself, but the pull was undeniable. My phone buzzed with a message from my partner, a sweet goodnight text that should have grounded me, but instead it made me feel guilty. Guilty for the way my thoughts were consumed not by the person I loved, but by the man in the room next door. That night, he knocked again. This time, I didn't hesitate as long. He stepped inside carrying nothing but that same quiet energy that unsettled me. We sat close, maybe too close, on the edge of the bed as we talked. At one point, his hand brushed against mine and stayed there. My breath caught, but I didn't pull away. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, as though asking for permission without words. I wanted to tell him no, to remind both of us where the line was, but the truth was I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in that moment, in the warmth of his gaze, in the safety of the silence that had become so much louder than words. We didn't cross the line that night, but we came close. Too close. His hand lingered on mine longer than it should have. His voice dropped lower, softer, as if every word was only for me. When he finally left, the door closing behind him felt heavier than it should have, as though I had lost something by letting him go. Lying in bed afterward, I couldn't escape the truth. I was drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain, in a way I didn't want to admit. I told myself it was just the isolation of the trip, the charm of his attention, the thrill of something forbidden. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. And as I closed my eyes, I knew the next night would not end the same way. The third day carried with it a different kind of energy. On the surface, everything looked the same: meetings, polite conversations, work being done as expected, but beneath that, there was a current between us that neither of us could ignore anymore. Every glance lingered a little too long. Every smile carried something unspoken, and I felt my heartbeat pick up whenever he stood close enough for me to catch the faint scent of his cologne. By evening, I was restless. I knew what was coming, even if I tried to deny it. When he asked me to join him for dinner in the quiet corner of the hotel restaurant, I agreed without hesitation. The lights were low, soft music drifted in the background, and the world outside felt far away. We talked about work at first, but quickly, the conversation slipped into safer, yet more dangerous, territory: our lives, our feelings, the loneliness we both carried. At one point, he looked straight into my eyes and said, almost in a whisper, "Do you ever wonder if the life you're living is really the one you want?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I felt my chest tighten because the truth was yes, I had wondered, many times. And in that moment, with him looking at me as though he could see through every layer of my thoughts, I felt exposed. We walked back slowly afterward, neither of us rushing to end the night. At my door, I expected him to pause, maybe say goodnight like before. But instead, he stepped inside when I opened it. There was no wine this time, no excuse. Just silence and the heavy weight of everything we had left unsaid until now. I tried to speak, to remind both of us of the line we weren't supposed to cross, but when he reached out and touched my cheek gently, the words died on my lips. His touch was careful, hesitant, as though giving me one last chance to stop him. I didn't. Instead, I let myself lean into it, my breath shaky but full of anticipation. That was the night we finally gave in. The tension that had been building since the start of the trip broke, and with it came a flood of emotions I couldn't control. It wasn't just desire, it was connection, intensity, a sense of being wanted in a way that left me trembling. Every moment felt heightened, every second carved into memory. But even as I surrendered to it, guilt gnawed at the edges of my heart. Images of my partner back home flashed in my mind, the promises I had made, the love I thought was unshakable. And yet here I was, wrapped in something that felt too powerful to resist. I told myself it was just the trip, just the isolation, but I knew better. When it was over, we lay in silence for a long time. He held me, his hand resting lightly against mine, and I wondered what he was thinking. Was this just a moment for him? Something temporary? Or did it mean more? I didn't ask, and he didn't say. But I felt the weight of the choice we had made pressing down on me like a shadow that wouldn't fade. And as I finally drifted into sleep, one thought lingered above all others. This was only the beginning. When the trip came to an end, reality returned faster than I was ready for. The long drive back felt heavier than the one that had brought us there. We still talked, still laughed at small things, but there was an unspoken distance between us now. The silence that lingered between conversations was no longer comfortable. It was filled with questions neither of us dared to ask. What would happen when we went back to our normal lives? What would we become once the isolation of that trip no longer wrapped around us? Back home, everything looked the same. My partner greeted me with warmth, asking about the meetings, about how exhausting the trip must have been. I smiled, answered carefully, and tried to push away the guilt sitting like a stone in my chest. But every word felt hollow. Every hug felt stolen. I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he had looked at me, the way he had held me like I was the only person who mattered. At work, things were different too. He carried himself with the same authority, the same presence, but when his eyes found mine across the office, there was something softer there. A flicker of the nights we had shared, hidden beneath the surface. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he would let his gaze linger, and I would feel my breath catch. Other times, he kept his distance, as though forcing himself to draw a line he knew had already been crossed. The days blurred into one another, and I felt myself living two lives. On the outside, I was the same person, dutiful partner, reliable employee. But inside, I was torn. The memory of his touch, the sound of his voice, the way he had made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years, it haunted me. I told myself it was a mistake, that I should forget it, bury it deep where no one could ever know. Yet every time I closed my eyes, it all came rushing back. I began to wonder what it had meant to him. Was it just a passing temptation, a moment of weakness brought on by loneliness? Or did it mean something deeper, something real? I was too afraid to ask, too afraid of the answer. Part of me wanted him to confess he felt the same, that it hadn't been just a trip fling. Another part of me feared he would confirm my worst suspicion, that I was nothing more than a distraction. One afternoon, as I passed him the hallway, our hands brushed accidentally. It lasted only a second, but it sent a jolt through me. He looked at me then, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes, I saw it. The same conflict, the same storm I carried inside me. Neither of us spoke, but the silence said enough. Nights became the hardest. Lying beside my partner, pretending everything was fine, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if secrets always feel this heavy. Love and betrayal twisted together in my chest until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I had never believed I could be the kind of person who strayed, who fell into temptation. And yet, when faced with it, I hadn't just stumbled. I had surrendered completely. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this will fade with time, if I will find a way to move on and forget. Or if this is the beginning of something that will change everything forever. What I do know is that some choices cannot be undone, and some moments live inside you long after they've passed. Every night since that trip, when I close my eyes, I find myself back there, alone with him, the world outside forgotten, and the weight of desire pulling us closer. And no matter how hard I try, I cannot escape the truth. Once the line has been crossed, nothing is ever the same again.